I mentioned sleep circles as a self-care practice in a recent video and was immediately reminded that many witches aren't actually familiar with this wonderful tool for restful, magical, and protected sleep.
Here come I to call your voice.
I first started experiencing disturbed sleep patterns when I was in college. A few years later, I had one baby and then another. And I don't care what's implied by the phrase sleeps like a baby, but human larvae are notoriously fitful sleepers. Maybe the phrase sleep like a baby actually means you sleep really hard, but only for about 2 hours, and then you wake up screaming. That must be it. It was, I think, shortly after the hatching of my eldest spawn that my then high priestess taught me about sleep circles. So, a sleep circle is a protective, energetic space intended to guard you while you sleep and dream. I've used it very effectively for myself during periods of insomnia, which, until I hit perimenopause a few years ago, were also periods of anxiety. So, if I had insomnia, it was almost always because I had anxiety. Um, Perimenopause absolutely has not decreased my anxiety, but it has given me new reasons to have troubled sleep. Night sweats, restless legs, an amplified ADHD chatterbox brain that never shuts up. I've also employed sleep circles to great effect during periods of conflict with other folks when I felt that psychic attack or magical attack might be happening. Um, Reality check here. Just, well, this is the reality check cam. Welcome to the reality check cam. I want to just stop and say that I am often uncomfortable discussing psychic attacks, magical attacks, those types of incidents because A, they are very vulnerable to discuss, and B, even other magical folks often feel that you're either attention seeking, somewhat delusional, or narcissistic when high intensity but invisible or unverifiable things are happening to you. Honestly, both of those things feel true even when magic isn't involved, right? If you come to people who are not like really, truly, deeply your people, um, they tend to want to distance themselves from that kind of high intensity drama. So I tend to take a fourth power of the Sphinx type approach and generally keep silent about that type of thing. We're probably going to talk some more in the future about hexing, jinxing, and other baneful work, both on the giving end and on the receiving end, right? But for now, just know that if you're experiencing a run of bad luck that feels like the entire universe has it out for you, sleep circles might help you at least restore your sleep and give you a safe space to recover in. One of the ways that I know how effective they really are is because I used them with my children when they were infants. They had no capacity at that age, at like 6 weeks old, to understand what I was doing. And because I'm not often showy in my magic, there was very little movement or gesture to signal even a 6 week old infant that I was doing literally anything at all. But they often still responded energetically to what I had done. It wasn't really until they were toddlers, at least, when they liked to watch or even help mommy call the sacred grove of trees that formed our sleep circles. So that seems like a good segue into the process or structure of sleep circles, kind of the how of a sleep circle. And truthfully, this can be very customized to you and your own practice. You can approach it as a short ritual that you perform before bed each night, a meditation that you undergo, or a ward that you activate that's just always in place and you just kind of touch it off to set it for the evening. Those are just a few examples of ways that you might approach the sleep circle concept and use it in your own life. How you personally envision the sleep circle is going to be also a very individualized thing. So it could be a very simple magic circle that you see or feel glowing around you. It might have watchtowers with guardians that you visualize and help raise, or it might be a ring of protective entities like lions prowling, or a dragon who lays down with her tail tucked under her head and you're part of her clutch of eggs, kept warm and safe near her bosom. That's a lovely sleep circle concept. I like that. I was taught to call upon an ancient and sacred grove of trees, and I've always stuck with that general concept when casting my sleep circles. One version of that was more ritualistic, which I'm going to demonstrate here in just a moment. While the other one was more meditative. The other version of casting the sleep circle was more meditative. I've used the ritualistic version when I was newer to magic and needed to like really embody the practice as fully as possible. That's often a thing that we do benefit from really at all stages, but you might find that your magic and the process of your magic becomes a little bit more muted and a little bit less visible and obvious to people as you feel more comfortable and confident in what you're doing in the first place. My children also really benefited from having that more ritualistic and sort of big or showy experiences as they became toddlers and preschoolers because it was more tangible and more immediate for them. They could see that I was doing something, and just sort of the ritual actions became part of their comfort and their going to sleep patterns, right? Later in my practice, I adapted it to be a longer process and a more meditative practice that also brought me into a trance state before sleep. So, a lot of the difference there is what I was doing for my children or for somebody else who needed to see the ritual happening, see the magic at work, versus doing it for myself, especially later in my practice where I was very confident that I was doing something because I'd had all these experiences already and I just needed the ritual elements for going to sleep as well and to be protected. So that's super helpful. Entering that trance state is super helpful for all kinds of dream magic as well. But it's pretty hard to demonstrate what that might look like. However, I can absolutely describe that meditation process, which you can then adapt for your own use. And that's part of what I'm going to do right now. So I'm going to start first with the meditative version, and then we'll do the more ritualistic, embodied version. The grove that I call upon right now is going to be familiar to the students of the Red Thread Academy. Hi. Which teaches the craft that's practiced within the Spiral Castle tradition of witchcraft, or of American folkloric witchcraft specifically. Within this tradition, we employ a cosmology where sacred space and sacred time are deeply connected, possibly to the point of being synonymous with each other. And that's kind of a major thing that I feel free to pause the video and take a second to put in your head that sacred space and sacred time might actually be one and the same thing. But it's the concept behind the witch's compass. It's one of the concepts behind the witch's compass, and specifically the way that we work with it. So for us, the year wheel, the wheel of the year, is the compass, and vice versa. And every month of the year is associated with a sacred tree and two sacred animals. One of those sacred animals is usually a winged creature, so an insect or a bird, something like that. Something that flies is almost always one of them, although not entirely always. That's not a hard and fast rule. We do honor 13 months in the sacred year, and each of those months has its own three spirit allies. So its own tree, a walking creature, and a flying creature, or maybe some combination of a walker, flyer, and a swimmer. But there's always going to be two animal type beings. And that 13th month, if you're curious where we've pulled a 13th month from, we base them on the 13 moons of the year, and one of those months is Samhain. Samhain is its own month in our tradition, and it can be almost a full month, like 3 weeks long, 4 weeks long. When I envision those three spirit allies, the tree and the two animals, I often see one animal resting or circling either the roots or the trunk of the tree, and the other one is nesting or perched in its branches. So the way that this process looks to begin with, I am fully lying down in bed in the position that I find most comfortable for sleep. My eyes are closed, and I go through a short grounding and centering exercise. For me, that short grounding and centering is always the three soul alignment that I demonstrated in the very first weeks that this channel existed. There's going to be a link down below. If you haven't seen that yet, I highly recommend it. It's not the greatest quality video because it was very early in my process, but you definitely get the idea of what's happening. You can see and hear what it is that I'm trying to walk you through. After I've done that grounding and centering, I then continue breathing rhythmically and deeply, often on a 4 count in, hold for 4 counts, 4 count out, hold out for 4 counts. So it's that 4 cycle breathing. That's usually what I use. And I'll use that while I'm envisioning either a tree at a crossroads or a castle on a hill. So this is going to be the center of my universe. This is the center of my circle, the center of my cosmology, and it is literally the place where I exist. So I am able to then see myself as the tree on the hill, the castle, etc., turning into all of the different sacred spaces. This is the point in the midst of a circumpunct. And I will give you a little image of a circumpunct, which is a familiar symbol, right? This is actually the astrological symbol for the sun, and this is a common and popular symbol for a lot of different spiritual concepts. So it's a really good depiction of me within that sacred space, or with the tree within the sacred space. The tree and animal spirits then that I mentioned before, where we've got one for each of the 13 months, they are going to be what forms the circle. And it's a grove. It becomes a sacred grove of guardians who protect me and offer wisdom, healing, and guidance as my own spirit journeys, like my own spirit is making the journey with the stars. I start the visualization with the month that I'm actually in. I'm making this video in February for the Spiral Castle trad. That means I'm calling on the willow tree, the cat, and the owl. For me, these are really specific and named spirit allies whom I've come to know across years of interaction. Willow, cat, and owl reside in the north of the compass in the way that I practice, which corresponds to the time of midnight, the season of Imbolc, and to Kolyo, which is the name that we use for our dark goddess. And I mentally and magically then turn the entire circle of the year. I don't actually turn in my bed. I do this all internally in my mind. But I turn the entire circle of the year, and I don't move on until I have clearly visualized the tree and the 2 animals in their station. So I would move from willow, cat, and owl right now to birch, goose, and hare at the spring equinox in the northeast. Then I would go to ash, snake, and moth or butterfly in April. At the east, which is associated with May Day or Beltane, I would picture the hawthorn, the bull, and the bee, and so forth. I'm not going to do the whole thing. I'm not going to verbalize the entire circle because there are materials that exist already about what we picture in which place. And that would feel more like a video if I did go into that. It feels more like a video on Spiral Castle tradition cosmology rather than sleep circles. And I'm happy to do that video on Spiral Castle cosmology if you're interested in it. I know that there's going to be probably a lot of people from the Red Thread Academy that would really dig a video like that. So we can definitely get that going. Blatant self-promotion, Lorelei, popping into blatantly self-promote. I just want to make sure that you know about the Red Thread Academy. If you're interested in learning about traditional folkloric and or initiatory witchcraft, then I've got a treat for you. These 3 books represent 3 years of structured yet flexible curriculum to guide you from dedication through 3rd degree initiation in an actual branch of witchcraft, the Spiral Castle tradition. You get weekly lessons, rituals, recommended reading lists, grimoire pages aligned to the content, and access to a vibrant community of witches via our Discord server. And when I say content, I mean actual, actionable, detailed, meaningful content. You should know that this is a rigorous and real witchcraft course. In fact, I initially started writing these course guides as a way to help my own coven with distance learning during 2020. They convey the teachings and rituals of the Spiral Castle tradition, just as if you were learning and practicing within our home coven. I'm not actually sure that anything else like this quite exists right now. If you want to learn more, you can check out the shop on my website at loreleiblack.com. Be sure to use discount code BladeandBroom15 at checkout to get 15% off your order. Just for being awesome and hanging out with me on YouTube. Okay, that's all. Get back in there. If I'm still awake after completing the entire grove, which is not always the case. Honestly, sometimes I fall asleep before I get it all finished, which is fine because that was the goal. Then I either do it again and again until I drift to sleep, or I picture myself sitting at that crossroads there in the center of the circle, or entering the spiral castle itself. And from there, what was essentially a guided or structured meditation then becomes an unguided meditation or even spirit flight, and then ultimately becomes dreaming after my spirit has done the work that it needs to do. Robin Artisan writes a lot about the dream state in the Clovenstone workings. If you're interested in the intersection of folkloric witchcraft and dream work, my only caveat is that Robin likes to state some of his opinions and experiences absolutes. And they may be, and I assume are, very valid for him and for the folks that have either had similar experiences as him or who have put a certain amount of faith in him that their psyches accept his opinions as facts, because that's definitely a thing that happens within the occult community, right? That we can take on the worldview that our teachers have, even if we've never met those teachers, because we just really value their opinion, and it becomes our opinion too, and it becomes the way that we see the world. So it may be very, very valid for folks that work like that, but there can also be, like, it's worth saying that there can be that placebo effect in magic and sorcery around some concepts. When we trust a teacher, their pronouncements can sometimes radically impact our realities. So it's one of the reasons that I'm particularly cautious with my own students and here on the channel about stating how I believe things work. I am pretty much always going to cushion that in a "this is my perspective" kind of approach to that. And I like to think that I'm a critical thinker and reader, and I want the same for you as somebody who's consuming this information. So if you do explore the very dream-based ensorceling that is mentioned and discussed in depth in the Clovenstone workings, just know that you can absolutely adapt the rituals there in ways that make sense to you. Where was I? Oh, yeah. Wrapping up the meditative sleep circle before demonstrating a more ritualized and embodied sleep circle. So like I said, if you drift off to sleep before the meditation is complete, that's not a problem at all. The goal was sleep, so hooray, you did it. All right, are you ready to see the more ritualized version that I mentioned? Okay, that's good. So now I'm going to give another caveat before I do it. The way that I'm about to call upon the sacred grove is different than what I literally just described as the meditation version. And that's because it's a different sacred grove that I'm actually going to be calling on. There's a couple of reasons for that. I want to show you a couple of different examples. And what I'm showing you is the one that I used to do with my children when they were little. The meditation version that I just talked about is based on spiral castle tradition cosmology. The ritualized version is going to be based on the Clan of the Laughing Dragon practices and cosmology. And in that tradition, which is the tradition that I was initially taught in, the sacred grove was the protective outer ring of the sacred space. The only trees within that grove that had a fixed position within that grove were the 2 holly trees that formed the doorway and the linden tree that was at the center of the sacred space. That was our world tree. So in that tradition, the circle came first, the sacred grove came first, with the anchoring point at the center of the circumpunct coming much later. Whereas in spiral castle tradition, we do the center point first and then build out the circular space of the compass. You're also going to hear some more regionality in the trees that I name, and specifically several trees that are regional to Southern California and others that are regional to Central Indiana, which are the 2 places where I was most immersed while practicing that tradition. Okay, enough preamble. Let's do this. Okay, before I actually do the demonstration, I just want to point out a couple of quick things. One, my physical doorway to this room is over here. So I'm going to be starting on one side of the door and then going around in a circle to the other side of the door, because I'm going to be calling doorway trees specifically, as you're going to see. So I orient myself to the actual door that's in the room rather than saying that those trees belong in a certain compass point. The door goes where the door goes. And then the other thing is that because this room is very, very small and I can't necessarily like back my camera up enough to get super good indication, I'm going to do what I often did with my children, where I just turn and pivot on the spot to do the hailing of the grove, to do the calling of the grove, as opposed to like walking around the room. So here's what it looks like. I call to the sacred holly trees that stand guard at this my gate. Rise up from the mists of time and form a protective warden with your roots below, your branches above, your thorny leaves all about. Rise up from the mists of time. I call to the birch and the beech, to the hawthorn and the blackthorn, to the oak and the ivy and the vine. I call to the oleander and the fig and the palm. By bark and branch and pith of wood, I call into every sacred tree. I call into every tree indigenous to this place to be here now, forming a roof above with your branches, a floor below with your roots, and a wall with your trunks. Returning to the holly trees, at the gate, stand sentinel, guard sleep, guard my dreams. Be here now. So mote it be. All right. So there's a lot of ways that you can adapt this practice. You can cast a circle with quarters and watchtowers, as I mentioned before. You can develop your own grove system. You can call upon standing stones or etheric temple spaces. You can call upon spirits of every imaginable description, spirits that you're already working with or spirits that you would like to work with. You can make offerings, recite a prayer, incorporate talismans, feed physical wards. You might use a tool like a witch's ladder or prayer beads, even to go into this meditative space. You could bring herbal rituals into the mix with something like a tea ceremony or anointing yourself with oils and salves or smoldering an incense that's calming and protective and that gives you really restful, sleepy vibes. My question for you is, have you ever tried a sleep circle before? Is this a practice that you do? If so, what kinds of results have you had? And if not, do you think that you might try it? And what might your sleep circle involve? If you were going to build one for yourself, having never done it before, what might you include in that? Would love to hear about all of that in the comments down below. And that's all I have to say about that this time, my friends. So I look forward to seeing you here next week. As always, tell your witchy friends that good things are happening here at Blade and Broom and help me feed the algorithm by clicking like and subscribe and sharing and all of that good stuff. All right, friends. Bye-bye.